Hey, my name is Yasmina and welcome back to my channel. I make videos all about books, book recommendations, writing, and publishing your books, so if that sounds like something interesting to you, please consider subscribing to my channel. Today's video is another fantasy book recommendations video, finally. I haven't made one of these in a very long time, I'm sorry. But today we are focusing on young adult fantasy series, which I read quite a bit of. I read all kinds of fantasy, whether it's middle grade, YA, or adult, I don't really care. As long as it's a good fantasy series, I don't really care what the age group is. I have read and enjoyed all of the series that I'm going to talk about today, so without further ado, let's get into my best YA fantasy series book recommendations. The first series I'm going to recommend to you guys is called the Witchland series by Susan Dennard. So we have the first book, which is called Truth Witch, and then we have the second book, Wind Witch, and the third book I have right here, Blood Witch. Now there's gonna be a fourth one, I'm not entirely sure if it's already out. There's also a prequel or a novella that goes in between some of these, so there's a lot more than just these three books, but these are the ones that I have right now in my collection, and I have read the first two in this series and really enjoyed it. In this world, the magic system revolves around witches, and every type of witch can do something different. So we have a truth witch who can spot truth from lies. Then we have a blood witch. Blood witches can control people by drops of their blood. Then we have thread witches who can see the threads that connect different people together and also kind of see the truth through that power. But in the first book, we have two best friends, Sophia and Isolt, and they get separated at the beginning of the book because they are being hunted. And so we follow the two sisters and all the other characters that come up in the series. I think it's really fun. The magic system, in my opinion, is really cool, and they're just really enjoyable and quite easy and quick to get through since they're not so long. So I would totally recommend trying this out. Next up, we have a very popular YA fantasy series, and I have the first 4 books in the series, and that is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. So we have Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, and Queen of Shadows. I think that's the order if I remember correctly, and I have only read the first 3. I have yet to read Queen of Shadows, but I am planning on reading this very soon. But these are super popular YA fantasy books, so I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard of them. I have a bit of mixed feelings about them because I really enjoyed the first 2. I just didn't enjoy the third one as much, which is why I didn't continue with the fourth one. So in the first book, we follow the main character, Selena Sardothian, and she is an assassin, and she is about to compete in a fight to the death competition for the prince in this world. The main character in this is really sassy and badass, and sometimes that gets on my nerves, sometimes I think it's really cool. So like I said, I'm a bit on the fence about the series, but as a whole I think you should give it a try and see if you like it or not. Then I have here another very popular YA fantasy series, and this is actually a duology, so there's only 2 books in the series, so you can be done really quick, and that is The Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I really love these books. I loved the action and the characters in this. We follow, I think, about 6 different characters, POVs, and they alternate between chapters, and there's just a ton of fantastic relationships in this, both friendships and romantic relationships. And we basically follow a band of outcasts that are set to do an impossible mission, and that is to infiltrate and retrieve a hostage from the infamous Ice Court, which is said to be impenetrable. But these 6 characters are on a mission to make that happen. Also, recently a Netflix adaptation of the previous series that this author has written, Shadow and Bone, has been announced, but a lot of the characters in this series appear in the previous series, Shadow and Bone, and thus in the Netflix show adaptation. Next up, we have one of my favorite books that I read last year, and a series I'm really interested in continuing because I really enjoyed the first book so much, and that is the Summoner series by Taran Matharu. The first book is called The Novice, and the second one is called Summoner. There are 4 books in total in this series, but I've only read the first one. I have a spoiler-free book review of The Novice, which I will link up here and down in the description if you're interested in hearing more about it. We basically follow the main character, Fletcher, who is a summoner, and at the beginning of the book he discovers his ability to summon demons from another world. And so the magic system revolves around these demons that you summon, and then they become your companion and your weapon. So I keep saying that this is kind of like a Pokemon magic system, and I think it lives up to that, but it's just really fun, really well done. It reminds me of that Harry Potter-esque kind of fantasy series. Just all around fantastic. I'm really looking forward to continuing on with the series, and I would highly recommend this. Next up, we have a series that I do not own physically, but I read all of the books on Kindle a while ago, and that is the Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy by Ray Carson. I read this quite a long time ago, but I remember loving this first book so much. The second and the third book weren't as great in my opinion, but the first book was fantastic. I loved it so much. So our main character in the series is 16, and at the beginning of the first book, she is promised as a wife to the new king, and she is the younger of two sisters, and she thinks that there's nothing special about her. However, there is something very special about her. I'm not gonna spoil anything because I can't remember what is a spoiler and what isn't in this series. So basically something happens and she has to flee her home, and we follow her on her adventure where she meets a bunch of wonderful characters and adventures through dangerous land. So I think the world building in this was really cool, as well as the magic system, and I just felt for these characters. Probably should reread the series and actually purchase some physical copies for myself to put on my bookshelf. Highly recommend checking this series out. Next up, we have a Chinese-inspired YA fantasy, and that is Eon and Iona Duology by Alison Goodman. So I have the two books right here. However, if you've watched my channel, you'll know that I didn't really enjoy the second book. It's only a duology, so this is the entire series, but I was really disappointed by the second book. However, the first book I remember being incredible the first time I read it. So in this world, the magic focuses around dragon magic, and the main character is a girl, but in this world, girls are not supposed to use magic, and so the main character masquerades as a boy to try and learn this powerful magic. So she kind of goes to train at a temple to harness this magical ability. I just remember this first book being so much fun and so great, again with a lot of good cultural representation. Like I said, this is inspired by Chinese mythology. I just think the second book kind of took a weird turn that I didn't particularly enjoy, but I would definitely at least recommend reading the first book. Now the next series, I'm a little bit unsure if it's classified as fantasy or science fiction or a combination of both, but that is the Reckoners series by Brandon Sanderson. So we have Steelheart as the first book, and then Firefight and Calamity. This is kind of a superhero type story, but Brandon Sanderson is a fantasy author, so this kind of falls a little bit in between fantasy and science fiction, but I'm gonna put it here because I really love this series and I would totally recommend this. This is a YA fantasy slash science fiction story about these epics that take over the world, and they basically destroy the world, and no one knows how to stop them. And at the beginning of the first book, our main character sees Steelheart, the epic in the first book, bleed. So he basically sees a weakness in this epic that is supposed to be indestructible. And so again, he joins a band of outcasts that are trying to fight these epics and return the world to its previous stability, where it wasn't being destroyed by these superhuman monsters, basically. It's really fun. I think the voice on this is really sarcastic and fun to follow, and just a general really enjoyable series. And of course, it's by one of my favorite authors, Brandon Sanderson. So the next series I want to talk about is Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton, and I have Rebel of the Sands, which is the first book, and Traitor to the Throne, which is the second book. It's a trilogy. I do not have the third book, but I really enjoyed the first book when I read it, again, a very long time ago. But this is an Arabian-inspired fantasy series, which at the time, back in the day, this was really rare. By now there are a ton of fantasy inspired by Arabian culture out, but at the time this was kind of unique. From what I remember, this focuses a lot more on the romance aspect between the main character and the love interest, but there's also some really cool world building and magic system involved in this. And again, just the setting in itself at the time when I read it was really unique to me, and so I think that was a big reason why I enjoyed this book so much. I still need to read the second one, and then of course eventually the third one, but yeah, if you're interested in, again, some more different cultural representation in YA fantasy, then I would definitely recommend looking into this. Then we have another duology. I just realized there's quite a few duologies in this video, which is nice because it means you can finish the series really quickly. That is Give the Dark My Love by Beth Revis, which was one of my favorite books of 2019, if I remember correctly. And then the sequel is called Bid My Soul Farewell, which I have yet to read. I really need to get to this year, but I adored this first book. This is a necromancy story, and so in this world there is a plague going on. Maybe not the best time to read this now that I think about it, but anyway, there is a plague. The rich people in this world don't think that it's a real thing and it only affects the poor and it'll never get to them. But our main character comes from a poor background and she has noticed loved ones dying from this disease already, and so she decides to do something about it, and she goes to study at a university of magic where she studies alchemy alchemy to try and help fight this disease. But one thing turns into another and there's necromancy involved. It's not a spoiler, it's in the back of the book. It's great. It's really, really dark. I think this is one of the darkest series from all of the books that I mentioned in this video. There's some really dark stuff going on in this and I loved it. The main character is fantastic. There is a romantic relationship going on, but I think it's done really well and it's not the main focus of the story at all. And just generally, I just really enjoyed this, so I would totally recommend this. And finally, the last series that I'm going to talk about today, and probably my favorite. I inadvertently left my favorite for last. You're probably sick of me talking about this series, but nevertheless, this is Shadow of the Fox trilogy by Julie Kagawa. Probably my favorite YA fantasy series of all time. I adore these books. The first one is Shadow of the Fox, then we have Soul of the Sword, and the third one is Night of the Dragon. And I have a full series, spoiler-free review of this series that I will link up here and down in the description. This is Japanese-inspired fantasy. It reads like an anime. It is incredible. It is so fast-paced, you barely have any time to breathe. It is full of whimsical magic and fantastic characters, fantastic relationships. I could talk on and on about this series, but I think if you've watched my channel for a while, you're really sick of me talking about these books. So again, I will link my full series review if you're interested in this series. But of all of the books in this video, if I'm gonna recommend just one, I would urge you to read this one because it's just fantastic. It has everything you will ever want and it's done so well. Definitely my favorite YA fantasy series. For sure. But that's it. Those were all the YA fantasy series I wanted to recommend to you guys today. I have way more on my bookshelves that I haven't started yet, so I'm very excited to get to those eventually. But these are all that I've read, at least the first book or two of in the series, and that I would warmly recommend you guys check it out. Let me know what are some of your favorite young adult fantasy series down in the comment section below, so maybe I can pick some more up for myself and find a new favorite. And of course, as always, I will leave links to all of these books down in the description below, so make sure you check that out if you're interested in picking any of these books up for yourself. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day and I'll see you next time with a new video. Bye!